are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth, all the cornerstones of our financial lives. So this is the first episode for 2026. This marks actually the start of the 7th year of the Way to Wow shows, the 5th in this particular format. The first 2 years were a little bit different. And, I can't believe that it's been that long, but, time flies when you're having fun. So, it's good to be back for the 2026 for 2026 and to hopefully be continuing to provide you with the information, the insights that you need in order to make sound financial decisions for you, your families, your loved ones. So I'm kicking off today. This was an episode that I had originally thought to do last year, and then I ended up replacing it with another topic. And so I realize now, just this moment, kind of maybe starting the year on kind of a downbeat topic, but maybe it's good to start the year out with a cautionary tale. Oftentimes, there's a lot of enthusiasm in dealing with the new year, and that can be good. It can get us kind of rocking and rolling, as they say. I know I'm one of the ventures in which I'm involved. We've been looking to kind of do a launch event, and the opportunity came up to do one, but it only gave us a window of either 1.5 or 2.5 weeks to prepare, and we were scrambling, and then unfortunately, but also kind of fortunately, the event got canceled, and now that we've really been able to start digging into a lot of the logistics of what we want to do, we'll have the opportunity to plan them better, to really take a look at what it is we want to do and how is the best way to accomplish it, and do that without kind of all the crazy time pressure. So it kind of sad to lose an opportunity on the one hand. On the other hand, maybe it's all for the best, and it'll set us up for better success as the year progresses. So today I'm going to be talking about the pitfalls related to scaling a business. And I'm going to be using the example of Krispy Kreme donuts as kind of a case study. So I don't know about you, but put a dozen of just original glazed Krispy Kreme donuts in front of me and turn your back, and yeah, they'll probably be gone. I mean, they're just, as far as I'm concerned, they're the best donuts I've ever had, with potentially one exception, and that was this little one-store donut shop on the lower, kind of Midtown West in Manhattan, that they made these just unbelievable creations of donuts. They were a donut and ice cream shop of all things. Let's be still my heart. But they're you can only get those Midtown West. So I don't have those here in California, but I do have Krispy Kreme, and the Krispy Kremes here in Los Angeles anyway are kosher as well. So even better, right? So Krispy Kreme donuts started back in 1939. They've been around a long time. They were around for a long time on the East Coast. They started in North Carolina, I believe. And so those of us who are West Coasters knew really nothing about them. And they kind of hit the country in a big splash in the early 2000s. And I know for myself, oh my gosh, I mean, the first time I had a Krispy Kreme donut, they just, especially when they're hot, they're, right off of being made, and, the hot sign is out, and I mean, they just melt in your mouth. You can, as they go down your throat, you can feel how bad they are for you, right? The sugar and the butter and everything, but who cares? They're so amazing. And they're hot and fresh. Logo is not really the thing, but the hot and fresh branding. I mean, it was so great. And indeed, when that light would come on, I think the business would increase, because people go, oh, hot and fresh donut. And I know when I first started going there, oftentimes, if you ordered some donuts, they would just pull one off of the conveyor belt, like literally hot and fresh, and hand it to you, in a wax paper, sheet. I mean, oh gosh, there is no greater donut experience. But and so that's why, as the 2000s progressed and Krispy Kreme started getting into some very severe problems, it was so unfortunate for, if you're at all a Krispy Kreme aficionado like me, it's like, oh no, are my Krispy Kremes going to go away? So, they I'm going to talk about some of the mistakes that they made. And, I think these are sort of cautionary notes for us as we look at our own businesses, not necessarily because, we're thinking of franchising or doing a big, regional or nationwide or even worldwide expansion. Probably most of us aren't. And yet, some of the lessons that we can learn from looking at Krispy Kreme's situation, I think will apply no matter what the size of our business. So, the sort of core problem I think that Krispy Kreme had was the dilution of its brand experience. So, when they went through this rapid expansion in the early 2000s, many of the new stores just didn't replicate that sort of signature hot and fresh experience that made the brand so iconic, right? You just 3 minutes, whatever. I mean, that in the end, that's what Krispy Kreme is selling. They're selling that experience. Yes, they sell donuts, of course, but it's the experience of eating the donuts, I think, that is so crucial to a brand, and a brand that is iconic like Krispy Kreme. So as the experience became inconsistent across different stores, so customer excitement faded, right? And Krispy Kreme has this kind of mystique about it. If you could be a fly on the window of the car when my friend Bill and I are driving somewhere, and the subject of Krispy Kreme comes up, it's like, two guys reliving a rapturous culinary experience. It's really kind of hilarious. I mean, I'm laughing inside as we're talking about Krispy Kreme. We both feel the same way, right? And to lose that, I mean, mystique, I think, is really the right word, is to really not understand what one's business is all about. And so it matters, because when the brand experience is weakened for customers, it erodes their loyalty, it reduces their visits, and of course that causes long-term revenue potential to at least decline, if not collapse, right? So for any of us who have a business, even if we're not, a well-known national brand like Krispy Kreme, or for that matter, an international brand like McDonald's, right? And all of these sort of storied restaurants, I think, or storied food outlets, whatever you want to call them, I think they all have at one time or another experienced this dilution of the brand experience to their detriment. Now, McDonald's has certainly, to digress from it, McDonald's certainly has experienced it, but they've kind of gotten it back and then they lose it a little bit, right? That's kind of, that cycle is normal, right? What we need to do is understand what is the core experiential element of our businesses. Okay. So I know for my business, the core experiential element is the individualized attention that I give to each matter, each client with whom or on which or with whom I work. Okay. So that plays through in a number of ways. It plays through in how I look at response times, how I look at how I respond, okay, the quality of the response, the way I write my emails, the way I write my text messages, the way I speak when I'm on the phone, right? It's reflected in the kind of relationships that I have with my clients. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was talking to one of my most important clients, and at the same time, I was picking up my friend Bill. We were going to a meeting. He also works with the same client. So, and he gets in the car and he's like, and I can see in his face, he's like, "What are you talking about?" And we were talking about just personal stuff. Okay. And kind of laughing and kidding each other about that it's something going on in my personal life. So, and and it's a husband and wife, and the husband is like giving me this, and the wife is like, no, this is good for Kevin, kind of thing. And at first, Bill was kind of mystified, and then after we kind of conducted the business of the call, rang off, and then I explained to him what was going on, right? So it's that kind, to create those kinds of relationships where we can meet on a human level, even as we're dealing with important, and actually in this case, kind of a contentious business situation, right? And so that is the core experience of my business. Okay. So what is the core experience for your business? Right. And I don't know, if you have a plumbing business, right? So if you, I think it's Jack Diamond Plumbing here in Los Angeles, their core experience is we show up on time, we're appropriately dressed, we don't smell bad, and we don't mess up your house. Right? So for anyone who's had sort of, Joe Schmo plumber come by, wow, that's a great experience. Okay. So the first lesson out of the scaling debacle that was Krispy Kreme, 20 years ago, is we need to understand the core element of our experience and then jealously guard delivering that core experience. Okay, that's number one. Number two, over-reliance on franchise revenue. So the way Krispy Kreme built up its income was by a massive sort of a massive and rapid buildup in the number of franchisees that it had. So if you're not familiar with how franchising works, especially for as well-known a brand as Krispy Kreme, so they can command a big upfront fee from a franchisee just for the opportunity to become the owner of in this case, Krispy Kreme franchised store. Okay, I can't tell you what the franchise fee is. It's not relevant. Like for something like McDonald's, my understanding is the franchise fee per store is like $1 to $2 million or something. So it's very, very high just to get your foot in the door. Now, from a revenue standpoint, that's great because Krispy Kreme was pulling in all this revenue from new franchisees who were opening new stores. The problem is, at some point, the franchisee growth either has to slow down or stop. Okay. And once it starts slowing down, all of a sudden, this one-time revenue from the franchise fees stopped coming in, or at least it declined. And revenue from the ongoing sale of donuts and coffee and whatever else is being sold at the store, that can take time for a store to build up. And so there's not sometimes often, and then this is the case with Krispy Kreme, there wasn't enough of the recurring revenue in order to sustain the level of their financial results. Okay. So this was very problematic, right? And it's, again, it was one of the things that led to the undoing of Krispy Kreme is they started seeing significant revenue drops, right? And for a company that has expanded that rapidly, the opposite would be expected, right? If you double, triple, quadruple the number of stores you have over a certain period of time, people who own your stock, analysts who are following your stock, could rightly kind of assume that if you're doubling stores, revenue ought to at least double. Okay. But that was not the case with Krispy Kreme because they became too reliant on these one-time fees. And because of some other factors that I'll talk about in a few minutes, the new franchisees often struggled to build up sales. Okay. So, they pay their big franchise fee. Okay. But now, in order for the company again, the way the franchising works is there's a big upfront franchise fee, and then there's a percentage of sales that's paid by the owner of a franchise, right? And so in order to gain through ongoing franchise fees, in essence, what Krispy Kreme corporate got from the one-time initial franchise fee, sales had to grow pretty dramatically, pretty quickly, and they didn't. The store owners just weren't able to do that. And so, again, that's what caused this decline, almost a collapse in revenue. So here's the challenge, right? If you're going to scale, or even if you're, again, have just a one-shot business in essence, right? Where is your revenue coming? Okay, is it a lot of sort of one-time sources, or are there ongoing sources? And you see this in all kinds of businesses, right? So the software business over the last 20 years or so has really converted from you pay a one-time fee, or not a one-time fee, you make a one-time payment to buy a software program. And then unless you're going to buy an update, that's it. So that was the model, say 20, 25 years ago. Now the model is the SaaS model, software as a service model, where sometimes you pay even a monthly fee. So, but in any event, there's sort of a periodic revenue that comes from maintaining the software. Okay. And that smooths out the revenue for a software company, right? So some businesses are somewhat reliant on one-time hits. So if one looks at the real estate business, for example, on the brokerage side, and looking at residential real estate to be specific, so a broker gets a listing on a house, he markets the house, finds a buyer, that transaction goes through, the sale closes, he gets his commission check. Okay, now he's got to look for the next listing, right? That's the challenge with that business. Whereas real estate property management, you typically a property owner is paying a monthly fee in order to have that property managed. Now, a lot of people on the brokerage side, they don't like property management because the fees, relatively speaking, are lower, right? So they would rather, follow the sort of riskier model in terms of at least revenue, and get more money. But that's why they get more money, right? Because they're assuming more risk. Whereas some people prefer the stability of the income that a property management company generates. I know when I had my company previous to my joining the Navy, I did both. So I had my property management company, which covered my sort of base expenses, if you will, and then I engaged in other things that were more sort of one-offs, if you will, right? And those were the big income hits, right? So I did appraisal and consulting in addition. And so the big amount of revenue came from that, but I had the property management revenue to, cover my basic expenses, right? So when we think about our businesses, we need to look at our revenue streams, right? And how do we strike a reasonable balance between ongoing revenue, okay, and more sort of one-off type revenue? That's the franchise fees as a percentage of sales versus the initial franchise fees for a new from the owner of a new store, who's just bought a new franchise, right? So whether we're scaling a big organization or looking at our own, we need to be cognizant that those are both important. Okay, now one of the reasons why newer Krispy Kreme store owners struggled to grow their sales so that the ongoing percentage franchise fee, would in essence make up, or not make up so much, but sort of keep revenue on par with the initial franchise fees, was Krispy Kreme expanded so quickly and they had so many stores opening so close together that these stores were cannibalizing each other. So it's an interesting situation because I know here in Southern California, I didn't really see that. So in a city as large as Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles, huge urban area, okay? We had 3 stores, none of which were within just a couple of miles of where I live. So we had a store in Santa Monica, which was about 7-8 miles away. We had another one in Burbank, which was probably 15 miles away, 10, 15 miles away. And the closest one for me was in the Crenshaw district, which I think was about 5 miles away. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like, over coverage, right? And by the way, the next closest one from there was, I think, down in either into East Los Angeles or down into Orange County. So here in Southern California, it struck me that they were pretty spread out. Although maybe people will we'll drive pretty far to get our Krispy Kreme donuts. So, but in any event, what the store owners saw was, they would buy a franchise, and then within a whatever space of time, another store would open close enough that they were cannibalizing each other's sales, right? So instead of being more judicious about what are called catchment areas, that's the area from which a retailer draws its customers, Krispy Kreme was just sort of selling as many franchises as they could. And as a result, they were undermining the success of their franchisees, and in the end, undermining their own success, right? And that's why the corporate Krispy Kreme, again, one of the reasons why corporate Krispy Kreme got into such difficulties. And so I think this is another thing that we need to consider is, as we grow our businesses, whether it's a local expansion, a regional expansion, a national expansion, or we're just growing our practices, how is that impacting, in essence, our sources of revenue? So, for example, I was having a conversation. I'm bringing up my friend Bill a lot. We've been talking a lot the last few days, and we were talking about potential new sources of business. And one of them I identified was a great source of business for Bill because they're not involved in anything having to do with real estate. But for me, the concern I expressed was, well, I think there's some overlap between what we do and how do each of us handle that from a revenue standpoint, right? So in essence, if we make an agreement to start working together on certain things, what happens if we find ourselves, in essence, cannibalizing each other, right? And how is that going to work out? And now for me, that's part of my focus anytime I look at these things is what is the long-term picture as well as the short-term picture, right? It takes a lot of time, effort, and sometimes money to build relationships. And so how is that going to pay off over the medium to long term is always a question I have, at least in the back of my mind, right? And so I think that same principle needs to be kept uppermost whenever we're looking at an expansion, whether it's a huge expansion like Krispy Kreme or it's something on a smaller scale. Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll be back for more. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. Okay, so the next issue that caused Krispy Kreme to struggle as a result of its very rapid scaling was with more and more stores, operating became more complex, but the systems that Krispy Kreme was using operationally couldn't keep pace. Okay, so new stores were opening faster than they could train staff, faster than they could maintain quality control systems. And so this is part of what led to the uneven customer experience, which, as I talked about a little earlier, diluted the customer, started diluting the overall brand experience, right? And so when we're scaling, or when we're doing really any kind of new initiative, we need to look at, okay, what are the sort of logistical underpinnings to doing this, and how will that impact the existing parts of our business? Are we going to start cannibalizing other parts of the business as we now feed money into this new initiative or into this expansion? Okay. Are we even just going to be able to keep up? Do we have enough people? Do they have proper training? Right? Or are we risking that, trying to do this with our existing staff and exhausting them to the point where they start making mistakes, or they start becoming unhappy, there's complaints at home, you're working too long, all those kinds of things. And so, again, unfortunately for Krispy Kreme, I think they were kind of a victim of their own success in that regard. And presumably they did some kind of planning for the expansion, but the expansion outran that planning, right? And I was having a conversation with a client yesterday, and I was one of the things actually this was last week, whatever. Um, One of the things I encourage clients to do is to really think, way far ahead and way sort of um, optimistically, if you will. Like, what if this really takes off? What would that mean? Just to have a sense of that in their heads, even if that scenario is unlikely. Maybe it's almost for sure not going to happen. Okay, fine. But what if it does? Okay. First of all, it's just a nice mental exercise, number 1. And number 2, if, sort of all the stars align, as they say, and the expansion plans or the new product launch really takes off, well, so at least you've done some kind of thinking about what needs to happen in order to support that. So this, seemingly great, lucky occurrence doesn't end up being the kind of negative that it became for Krispy Kreme, just on some level badly harming the business. Okay. So, whatever we're going to do, we need to make sure that the operational capacity, the logistics are there to support it, that as things get more complex, we're able to scale them in a way that supports the scaling of the business, right? It's all good and well to have huge sales growth, right? But the bottom line is we need to meet the sales growth. Okay, next. Um, Krispy Kreme, because they had these, strong growth targets, et cetera, uh, they just really didn't have the financial and accounting checks and balances in place to deal with all of this huge turnover of dollars, right? So they had tons of money coming in because of the franchise fees, but a lot of money going out. And the whole thing really became chaotic. There was a lot of equipment being bought, leased. They were trying to rapidly expand production capacity. At the same time, they were experiencing major cash flow problems, and because the accounting system wasn't keeping up, the operational people on the one hand were they're building to meet capacity and demand, and yet on the financial side, they're not able to keep pace and know if all of this activity can even be supported financially, right? And it got so bad that it triggered an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, Krispy Kreme at the time was a publicly traded company, so that's why the SEC got involved, right? And at that point, things are probably in pretty bad shape. Okay, so why does this matter? Again, if our this is somewhat similar to the logistical and operational side. If the financial side is not keeping pace, okay, we have no idea if we're on track to remain even break even, let alone profitable, right? So expansion is great, and if the intention is to expand in order to gain market share, and a company is willing, at least temporarily, to give up some profitability, or even to for short term take some losses in order to gain market share, fine, that may very well be a valid decision. But right, if they don't know that's what they're doing, then it becomes problematic, right? And that was the case for Krispy Kreme. So earlier this morning, I was listening to a podcast. It's funny, I'm going to mention this podcast twice in a row now. I mentioned it yesterday, the Odd Lots podcast. And they were talking about what's happening in the oil industry, relative to the events in Venezuela, et cetera. And uh, oops, now I lost why I brought this up. Da, 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 da. Okay, well, I'm going to drop that example. The example went away. Um, in any event, if if a business is, oh, I'm sorry. Here's where the example came. So um, currently, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies, is keeping production at a fairly high level, which is keeping oil prices down. Now, the analyst with whom the hosts were speaking said that he thinks they're doing this because there is excess capacity in the industry right now. And the hope among OPEC members is that by keeping production up and prices low, it will absorb this excess capacity over this year so that as they head into 2027 and 28 and beyond, they'll have the ability to start raising prices without having to curtail production. Okay, so I mean, okay, sounds like it could work out that way, right? But I think the connection point is they're doing something that may not be in their best economic interests right now because they're looking beyond the horizon to what will this mean a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, right? And so when it comes to understanding the financial realities of our business, right, we need to know what they are, otherwise we're making decisions in the dark. Okay, so again, if we're going to expand, if we're going to embark on an expansion plan, we need to make sure that our accounting systems can handle that and can scale up at the same speed at which the business is scaling so that we can know whether the expansion is actually working for the benefit of the business, or conversely, it's draining the resources of the business and maybe we need to tap the brakes. Okay, so uh, just as the operational and logistical aspects need to be planned out and need to be rapidly scalable, so too the accounting and financial side of a business. Both of those have to work. Okay. You don't need to scale up the financial and accounting side of a business if the business isn't expanding. On the other hand, if it is going to expand, you have to have this other part, the financial and accounting part. Otherwise, you won't know whether the expansion is really a benefit. Okay, and then finally, uh, uh, you know, Krispy Kreme in kind of the final analysis, they failed to understand the market limits. So Krispy Kreme had an almost cultish loyalty on the East Coast. And their, I think, assumption was that they were going to be able to replicate that loyalty across the country. Now, a couple of reasons why that may not be the case. Number one, Krispy Kreme had been around for what, 80 years, 75 years to really become a part of the culture where it existed on the East Coast. Okay. And I don't think we should overlook time as a factor in building customer loyalty, client loyalty. Okay. That's number one. Number two, the coffee and donut culture on the East Coast is different than the culture here on the West Coast. Okay. We have we're a driving culture here, and cup holders notwithstanding, right? To like have your donut and have your coffee in your car or whatever. That wasn't really what Krispy Kreme um, was geared to do. It was more about, going into the store, getting your box of donuts and your thing of coffee and that kind of thing. So there was sort of a lack of recognition of regional differences in eating patterns and that sort of thing. And all of this created what amounted to excess supply, and it left franchisees with stores that weren't profitable, unsold inventory, which causes a loss, and in the end, a lot of the franchises closed because they just were not financially viable. So in the end, by ignoring the differentiation in markets, there was a tremendous amount of capital wasted, both by the franchisees and by Krispy Kreme corporate itself. Ended up with a lot of frustrated store owners, and it really damaged their reputation. Now, has the reputation recovered now? Well, I don't know. I think there's been a somewhat of a permanent loss of luster to the Krispy Kreme brand. They may, they're probably never going to recapture the level of mystique they had on the East Coast prior to, to this expansion here in the 21st century, right? Now, that doesn't mean that they can't go on to be, to grow. And in fact, more recently, Krispy Kreme is looking to get involved in some growth, but in a much more measured way. After the sort of crash of the attempt to scale on a franchise basis, I saw, as you may, Krispy Kreme started delivering to grocery stores. So I see them at my local, Ralph's store. That's typically where I get my Krispy Kreme donuts now. They're not the hot and fresh ones. If I go to a store once in a while, I'll still do that. But Krispy Kreme looked for different ways to scale that weren't so capital intensive and wouldn't be as liable to creating, cannibalization of franchisees and that sort of thing as their prior plan had been. And so I think the final lesson for us is that if we're planning on expanding our businesses, what is going to be the best way to do that, right? So one of my clients, perennially talks about wanting to scale up and hire thousands of people to do this and to do that. And I pretty consistently counsel him, is that really going to be the best way to do it? You're talking about taking on ever larger amounts of overhead in the millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, in terms of expense. Whereas, how can you do more with automation, with AI, with subcontracting out to other companies who can do part or even in some cases all of what you need done? And that way you're not having to make big capital expenditures in order to expand, right? Now, there's downsides to that as well, of course. The point is to look at these options, weigh out the pluses and the minuses of each option, and make decisions based on that kind of considered analysis, whether it's analysis of the market, whether it's an analysis of logistics, analysis of financing. All of these factors need to go into our plans to scale or start a new initiative in our business, and they should be carefully considered before we start spending a lot of money and before we launch a new initiative. So that's I think those are the lessons on scaling Pitfalls from Krispy Kreme's example. I hopefully their problems will help us avoid them in the future. I still remain a Krispy Kreme lover, so that's undimmed. Look, all businesses make mistakes, at least from time to time. But to my mind, they still have a fantastic product, and they have a great future. And it appears that they learned some good lessons from that otherwise difficult experience. So I thank you very much for joining me today. This is my last show for this week, so I'll look forward to seeing you next week. And if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, links to social media are in the show notes when the episode posts on YouTube. Always happy to hear them. If you have an idea for something that you want to hear about, learn about, always glad to entertain those as well. So thanks again for watching. Cheers to my live viewers. And let's see. Just signing off. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.